Welcome to this session of transaction control transformation. In this session, we'll understand what transaction control transformation is, what are the benefits of it, and what are the various properties which we have to take care during using this transaction control in a mapping, and an example with one of the usual interview questions which come up in any of the interviews. So first of all, let's understand what does the term transaction mean. Okay, let's say you have a whole step, okay, and a series of steps, let's say from point 1 to 10. Unless all steps from 1 to 10 are complete, it's not a step done, right? Though you've divided the complete step into 10 different chunks, unless you complete each of these chunks, your step is not complete. So transaction is part of a activity that we want to treat as a complete step. Okay, it can be a small chunk. We can call that small chunk as an sub transaction, but unless you've done with all of those chunks, it is not a complete work done. Okay, it has to either happen in full or it has to roll back. Meaning, let's go back to that previous example of 1 to 10 chunks. Let's say the step from 1 to 8 is complete. For some reason 8 to 9th step is not done. Then the system has to roll back whatever it has done till 8 and come back to 0. So either it has to do it completely, which is successful from 1 to 10, or it has to start at 0 again, right? That is a usual meaning of transaction. Now let's take a very basic example. Let's say you have to give money to someone. Okay, what are the different ways of sending money? You either use your bank online transfer, or you withdraw the money from your cash ATM, go to the bank, write a slip, deposit into the sender's account. Now when is the transaction complete here? It's not when you log into your online banking system and click on transfer the amount. It is complete only when it is received by the recipient, isn't it? Now let's say for some reason I gave the bank account number of the recipient is wrong. Okay, what will happen then? With today's banking technology, they'll suspend the amount and either revert it to your actual account or keep it in the suspended account of the bank and send an intimation to you that something went wrong and you have to correct it. So the transaction was initiated, but it's not complete, right? So unless the end user or the end customer receives the money, your transaction is not complete, right? So that's a perfect real-time example. Now when we go to the real-time feature, let's say the online transfer, which is very common these days, there are multiple checks done on the recipient's account and on the sender's account as well. And if any of these checks fail, that will be suspended or it will be held by the bank unless you give further information, right? That's a real-time example. Now let's understand what is a database transaction. Now in database, transactions also do similar to these kind of checks to ensure that the transaction is complete. For example, if you try to do an update to a record, okay, the system will log that record for others not to do any changes till your activity is complete, right? That's a transaction log, which means that no one else can do any DML operation on that particular record until yours is complete. Or let's take it the other way, somebody else is trying to update it, and if you want to do the same thing, you have to wait till the previous transaction is complete, right? Now in Informatica, the transaction also behaves in almost the similar way like we have spoken in the database, or till now with whatever examples we have seen. Now in Informatica, the transaction is considered to be a set of rows bound by commit or rollback. Okay, now when I say set of rows, it can be 1, 10, 20 or any number of them. Okay, so these are bound with one of the transaction statements, which can be a commit or a rollback. Okay, now when we say that, does it mean either everything should go for a commit or everything should go for a rollback? Now there I can give a condition with which the commit or the rollback will happen for multiple rows. Okay, we can define the transaction based on the group of rows ordered on a common key, like a primary key or a business key, which we define based on the functionality and the business requirements, like our employee ID or a combination of employee ID and department ID, which will be more unique rather than a normal entity identity key. Okay, now these can be set up both at mapping level and at the session level. Now let's see how do we set it at the mapping level. Okay, let's go back to the mapping part here. I'll connect to my repository. Now while that's coming up, so what is the whole logic or the business purpose of having the transaction control? Like I said, it's to do the commit of a particular record or a rollback of a particular record. Let's see if my Informatica services are not started. So I just started it. So let's give it a minute quickly for it to come up. The first thing which Informatica services will do whenever the services are restarted is to enable the Tomcat to connect to the admin console. So I'm just checking if this comes up. Once it is there, we can go with the rest of the tool usages. Okay, let's see here, it started. So it should come up now. Okay, let's give it some more time. So for the transaction control transformation, do we regularly use it in the mappings, or the answer to that will be completely depending on our requirement, and it is not one of the regularly used transformations. But if you have to have a situation where you either do all the transactions together as a commit or a rollback, we might have to use it. Again, transaction control transformation completely depends on the volumes of data which we are doing, because it might impact performance, the whole performance of the job, as we are talking about the transactions, right? So it has to either complete it or it has to reject it. So if you're doing it for a whole large data set, then it's you have to also consider the performance tuning steps before you design it, or after you design it, make sure it is running with the actual volumes in which it can be enabled in production, and work according to that. Okay, let's come back to this. Let's see if we can access it here. Okay, we got connected. Let's go to our demo folder here. Okay, now when we are trying to do the example, obviously we would go with the employee in DEPT, because it's the main goal for us here is to understand how this works. Okay, rather than going into a complex example and mixing things up, let's understand what actually this does behind the screens, because end of it, the properties and the features which you use for this transformation will be the same across. All you have to do is plug it in based on your functional requirement in the required location, to get the output. Now in this example, what we will try to do is to create a mapping which will dynamically create data or dynamically create the target files based on a condition. Okay, so the reason we chose this example is in the interview questions, this is one of the common or regularly asked questions, is how do you create dynamic files. Now in Informatica, whenever you go to the workflow manager and see, you have the file name option to be given as only one in the session properties. So in a default method, you cannot create dynamic files. You can only load data into a single file, or you define multiple targets in your target designer and connect all of those into your mapping. Now let's say I have a situation where I'm not sure how many files should be created. Okay, but based on a condition, if there are, let's say, 10 departments, I want 10 target files. Let's say tomorrow's file has only 4 departments, I want only 4 of them. In day after tomorrow, if I have 500, I want to create 500 target files for me dynamically. Okay, now obviously we cannot do it within a single mapping, because first of all, let's assume it's 500. Okay, when we say it's 500, you cannot connect, I mean we can do it, but it's not the best approach of connecting 500 target instances within a mapping and loading it. Now tomorrow, let's say they add 100 more or remove 100. You have to touch the mapping, follow your deployment process, test it. So it's a 2-week or a 1-week process, right? So if you have to make it dynamic, how do we do that? Chose this example because it includes this interview question and the transaction control transformation as well. So here my source data is nothing but a flat file, which is employee underscore ff. Sorry, the employee underscore source. Okay, it's a usual flat file. I have imported it from the source, import from file, from my source directory, and saved it here. Okay, here my target will also be a flat file because I am dynamically generating it. Okay, so when I create my target file, which will be of this kind, I have added a new attribute here called file name. How did I add it here? The file name attribute is an option which comes up in your target columns. So what did I do? I'm in the target designer. I double clicked on the file. This was imported earlier for another example. So in the columns, there is an icon here. If you see, let me remove this guy. Okay, now these are the employee default columns, your employee number, name, department, salary, commission, and all that. See this last option here, the one with F, which says add file name column to this table. I clicked on it. Then I get a file name, string 255, which is the max precision, and the format is also disabled. So in the whole of this attribute, the file name, I'm not able to edit anything because it is grayed out, that is system generated. Alright, so for the file name type, we need to use for dynamically generating the files, we need this in the next step of execution, so we have added it. So this is also one of the interview questions. They would ask you, how do you get the file name which you have processed in the target system? Now you can use this option in any requirement you have. It is not only for this dynamically split of files. If you have a requirement where the business or the users want to look at the file name which has loaded that data, you can put this in here, add a column to your target, and load that file name. Okay, so let me save this quickly. So I have the source, I have the target. We'll go to the mapping. and we'll create the mapping name as n underscore dyn tgt using tc transaction control, dynamic target using transaction control. Now the naming conventions, again, as I said earlier, is completely dependent on how you want to or how the project guidelines are based on for that naming convention. Just remember, one of the basic aspects for naming conventions for any of the objects in the whole of the development of Informatica is to make it little clear for someone who's looking at it. Let's say you have developed this mapping and you have named it like this. Do you think a third person, whoever looks at it, can understand what this means? If he can, you can leave it as it is. If you think this is a little too shortcutty, then add more, saying t underscore control or tran control, something like that, whichever you prefer. Okay, now let's get our source. Does this have the file name? No. Did we add the file name? No, we added the file name to the target, so our source is fine. Now obviously when we got the source, we will get the source qualifier, and as this being is flat file, we don't have any option to set any properties except for tracing level. We know tracing level is that way of logging which Informatica wants to do it at the logging at the session log level when the job is run. Okay, now right after this, based on the type of data which you're receiving, you can have the sorter transformation or not. When I say based on the type, you have to understand how your source system is loading the data. Okay, when I say source system is loading the data, it means from your data provider, if you know how is the file is generated, is it manually created, or is there a system which is generating that file, or is it a process within your area? When I say within your area, is it a file which is generated from another job of the predecessor of this job? Then try to make it or create the file in a sorted manner, which would make it easy for us to take it here, if it's in your control. If it's some other data provider who is giving it from a system, just check with them if that can be done in a ordered manner. If not, we can do it anytime here with the sorter transformation. If it is done manually, obviously we cannot ask them to sort it, because if they are adding the file or data into the system as and when it is available, you cannot expect it to be in the sorted manner, right? Now try all the pre-steps. If nothing works, you already have an option, which is our sorter transformation. So go to the transformations, get the sorter. The default naming convention of sorter is s underscore. I'll just put ascending here. Just drag and drop all of my attributes. I wouldn't need year-end bonus because I used year-end bonus for some other examples, so I'm not pulling that ahead from my source qualifier. Always take only the attributes which you need for the processing and for your target system. Do not drag this till end of the target and leave it there. It will still impact your performance, because though it's very minute of seconds or the fraction of seconds, overall based on the volumes of the data, it will still impact your performance. So I don't need it, I left it here. Okay, now in the sorter transformation, if you go to the properties, we know what these properties are. You have a temp directory, you have the auto cache creation, where integration service will create the cache automatically or decide how much space is required for this caching to be done. And in the sorter transformation here, let's select the department number. Okay, because now I am dynamically generating the target files based on the department number, right? So we select the department port as the sort column in the default order, which is the ascending order. This is to keep all department records in the same department file based on the department number. It will be more clear for you once you see the target files. Okay, now that's all this has to do. Now, based on your requirement, let's say there are two things which you have to consider: your department number and employee number. Then you choose both the keys, leave both of them in the same order, either ascending or descending, based on your requirement again, and consider or go ahead along with that. Okay, so you would, let's click on apply, okay here, and in the next step we would get the expression transformation. Why are we getting expression transformation for? In the expression transformation, we will take all the sorted data from the sorter transformation and prepare the data for the transaction control transformation to do the commit and the rollback based on our logic. Okay, so let's rename this. Don't leave the names as it is which are coming from the transaction control. I mean, it's one of the best practices to rename the transformations to make it understandable for someone who's looking at it. So we'll just write exp underscore prep tc. We are preparing the data for transaction control. Okay, well, to extend the best practice, you have to actually mention a one-liner. This transformation will be used to create the data for the transaction control transformation to split the target files dynamically. Okay, apply. That's an expected one because it does not have any input ports, so I'll say yes, click OK. Just pull all of my rows from here. I clicked on the first one, shift on the keyboard, clicked on the last one to select everything, click on the head here, drag and drop. Okay, now you have the employee data which is sorted based on the department number into an expression transformation. Now here you learn another logic called previous record check. Let's go there in a minute. Now in your target we have added, what was the name of the target? TGTFF. So in the target, let me drag it here into the mapping. We have added a port called file name. So with what attribute you will load this? So let's design that first. So I'll double click open, click on new port, call this as file name. Will it be a string? File name? Yes, because it has to have the name of it. So based on the naming convention or the usual length of the file which you think, give +10 or +5. Let me give 255, which is the max. It's an output port, so I'll just select the output port, and in here I'll take my input department number, okay, and concatenate it with the actual department number which is coming with. So let me start it over. So I'll create a hard-coded value, dept underscore number, close the single quote to close the hard-coded value, join this using two pipelines, which is the concatenation option of what is our department number here? That's a decimal, right? So we need to convert that into a text. So how do we convert that into a text? By using the toChar function, which is already available. Take the department number, okay, and what is the extension of the file name which you want to generate? Now that depends on your downstream systems. If it's within your system alone, then you can decide which one to be used. But if it is the downstream system which is expecting it to be in a out dot dat dot txt or whatever format they want. So based on the format they want to look at it, you can enable that here. Let me just comment so that we can refer it for future. And in the end, let me give it as a dot text for now. So I'll again start this single quote because I need to hard code this for every entry. Close the single quote. Always make sure you validate it and you get this message that it is successful. Okay, apply. Okay, and I did not save this mapping till now, so I can use Ctrl S on the keyboard or click on save in the repository menu. It is right now invalid because nothing is connected to the target, which is fine because still work is in progress. So now I have all the output columns which I have, right? So what is the next one? Now for the transaction control transformation to create or split the records further, we need to have another logic called previous record check. Okay, how do we do that? Now this is also one of the questions which usually comes up in the interview. How do you check a previous record? Now what are the situations where you have to check the previous record? Let's say I have to figure out if from the file I'm getting the same record more than once. Okay, if I have department number 10 which I'm looking for it to be present only once, but if for some reason the source provider is sending it twice, and if it is failing because of a unique constraint, then I have to figure out a way to take only one record, and whatever comes after that, how many ever times, I need to reject it. That's the scenario where we use previous record check. We use the same logic here to find out, to see how many number of records should be moved into a particular target. Meaning, if department number has 10 records, the system should move all of those 10 records together, which is a group of records, right? Which is a group, into a file and create the file using the transaction control, which is a commit. Alright, you'll get a clear picture once we write the logic here. So I'll go to the transaction control expression again. Okay, I'll go to the expression transformation. Let me not call this a transaction control, and I'll create multiple ports here. The first one is to see if there is a change. Okay, let's call this as a variable v underscore change flag. Okay, this will be an integer or a string, whichever you prefer. If you give it as an integer, you should give 1 and 0. If you want to leave it as a string, you can give y and n, or yes or n0. Whenever you're using the flags, try to give that in a numeric fashion, integer way, because the system do not have to convert the string into an ASCII value first to compare it. This is also one of the basic guidelines of any of the data modeling, any of your database flag checking, to have a flag in a numeric fashion. Now, if you have a flag where you have more than 2 attributes, then obviously you have to identify it some way, and you cannot start giving numbers from 0 to 100 and always try to remember what is 20, what is 10. But if you have only 2 choices, either yes or no, keep it as 1 and 0, because it's easy to understand, and it also improves the way the data is processed across technologies, which is your database, Informatica and everything. Okay, so let's go with the integer here. Now that's a variable, so I'll click on the variable port here, and here my check will be to see if department is equal to the previous department number. Okay, so I'll go to the ports. I'll write an if condition. In Informatica, as we all know, it is IIF for if, it's not only IF. Okay, get the department number. To verify, if it's equal or if it's not equal to the previous department. Now, where is previous department in the list? It is not there, which means you have to create it first for this variable port to be valid. So let me create one here and call this as previous DEPT number. Okay, now this should be the similar one just like your department number. Okay, so I would give the decimal here. Though you give 10 as a precision, as it has only 2, it will take only 2. Okay, so you can change it to 2 or leave it at 10, or if you think the department number will be more than 2 bytes at any time, just make it as a 10 or whatever is the standard. Okay, now this will also be a variable because we don't want to use it further, and in the variable port here we call the department from our ports. So what are we doing here? We are actually saving the department number in this variable, which we are passing it to the previous check flag to see if it is the same. So what will happen? For the first record, this will always be null, right? Second record, when the second record comes in, okay, let me put it this way. Okay, let's say 10. I'm just giving the department number, I'm not putting the whole record here. So previous value, when the first record goes in, this will be null, right? And in the variable port, in our variable port, this will be 10, right? When the second record comes in, as this is the variable, this would stay here, and second record also has 10, this will come here, right? When the third record comes in, 10 will stay here, 20 will come here. Then whenever there is a change, the flag will be turned to 1. Whenever there is no change, it will be 0. Sorry. Okay, so using this logic, we can identify a group of records from a data set. So we are flagging all the records of department number 10 together, 20 together, and 30 together in the logic. Okay, so we have defined the department number here, and in this we have to now define saying if department number is not equal to the previous department number, then it's 1, else 0. Now what is 1? 1 is change flag, 0 is it is not changed, right? So we have defined both of these as variables. Now we need to send this flag outside, isn't it? So we'll create an output port. We have to send this flag outside for the transaction control to know what that is all about. So let's open this, call your vChange flag. Okay, I'll repeat this again. So the first thing which we have done is we have created a file name with which it should create the data. Okay, and then we created a variable which will check the previous record to find out if there is a change with the previous record and the current record. And at the end, we are taking the change flag as an output port for the next step to be done. Okay, now we've prepared the data for transaction control transformation. Now let's see how to use it. Go to transformations, create TC, which is the transaction control. In some of the naming conventions, you can call it as TRC or TRCN and things like that. Like I said, it's more to understand and see how you want to deal with the naming conventions. Okay, click on create, done. Okay, and just drag and drop all the data from your expression transformation into the transaction control transformation. Okay, now Going back to the explanation of transaction control transformation, transaction control is always a connected transformation. You cannot use this as an unconnected one, and it is active because you have an option to roll back, right? It is active, which will let us control if the record should go in or roll back. If you have a logic which you have set to roll it back, then you're reducing the number of records, which makes it an active transformation, right? Now let's see how do we enable, or what are the ports which are available here. Okay, I'll double click. Transformation, it's the same thing. You can rename it here, you make it reusable, you write a description to what it is doing. Ports, you don't have any specific ports here, just like your sorter or anything. It's just input and output, where input is for reading the data, output is for providing the data to the next part of it. Okay, properties tab. Here you actually define what is the condition based on which the transaction should be happening. Now what is the condition with which it should happen? Now this expression where you see TC continue transaction is a meaning where the integration service, or it's an indication to the integration service that it should not change anything for this row. Now the whole of this, which is highlighted in that dark blue color, is a constant which Informatica identifies, and it understands that whenever it sees a command like this or a constant like this, it has to not do any action. So what are the other ones? Just like this, you have TC underscore commit before. What does this mean? When it sees this, it is the integration service step to first commit the current transaction, okay, begin a new transaction, and write the current row to the new transaction. Okay, which means, so the current row will not be committed till the second row is read as a, it's just like your commit before trigger. You have a before commit trigger. So what does it do? Before it commits to the database, it writes or performs that action and then commits it, right? So what does this do? TC commit before, it passes an instruction to the integration service to first commit the current transaction, okay, begin a new transaction, and write the current row to the new transaction, which means the incoming record is first committed, the same record is given as a new transaction. Okay, then you have another one called, okay, let me leave it here so that we can see all of it together. Commit after. What does this commit after do? It is just the opposite of the one before, which is, in this case, the current row is written to the target, it commits the transaction, begins a new transaction. Now that new transaction is the one which will be committed, which will be sent to the next level because it has got committed again. I'll repeat that. The TC commit after is an indication to the integration service to write the current row to the target, okay, commit the transaction, and begin a new transaction, which means read the next row. Okay, now what happens to the current record? It's already committed to the target, so that's already commit after, right? And then you have, just like commit, you have rollback before and rollback after. Okay, so whatever we spoke about commit, that'll be applicable here for a rollback based on the condition whichever we are writing here. Now, apart from any of this, let's just say I want to write something like this. If you give something like this, first of all, it's not identified by the system because it did not change or consider it as a constant which Informatica identifies. But if you still pass it on with some variable or things like that, this session will fail, saying that's not a recognized format of that's not a recognized format for it to do the transactions. Okay, now those are the different types. These are clearly defined in our help document. It is confusing in the beginning, so you just have to understand what this is and try to do an example for each one of it, and you'll be able to understand it. Okay, so for this example where we are dynamically splitting the data, now we are getting a change record from your file name, right? So let me say okay to this. This should be an output port because this is what will decide at what point should the transaction control commit so that it will create a file. So I'll just pull it here, open the transaction control, go to the properties directly, transaction control condition, and here we'll write an expression or the if condition to check if the change flag is equal to 1, which means whenever there is a change, then use the let me see if I can find it here. We can always write it, then make it a commit before. Okay, else continue. So whenever, let me finish this, I'll explain that again. Okay, so what will happen now? Let's say I'm getting department number 10 3 times. Okay, till it finds the change flag. Okay, first of all, let's say that's the first one. So it finds a change flag here. Okay, then it will commit it, which means it will send this bunch of records into the target first. Okay, then I'm getting 20 20 20 and 20. Then there is a change flag again. So all of these 4 records now with department 20 are sent to the target. Now whenever this is 0, it is still continuing. So for every step here, CF is 0. CF is 0. CF is 0. Similar to here, CF is 0. CF is 0. Alright, so whenever there is a 1 again, and if you have 30, then the next record is CF0. Whenever there is a CF0, it goes to continue, which means don't do any action, go to the next step. Whenever CF is 1, commit it before it goes to the next step. Okay, now we are done with the mapping. We can actually connect this to the target. Let me quickly validate this, which is correct. Apply OK, and let's connect everything to our target system. Okay, except for the change flag, which I don't need because the purpose of change flag is still the transaction control. It is valid now. I don't have the workflow manager open, so I can generate it here. Now you can use the generate workflow option even if your workflow manager is open, but for you to see the latest workflow which you have created, you need to refresh, which is like disconnecting the folder and connecting it back. Okay, This is the prefix which the system is giving. Click next, next, finish. I'll open the workflow manager now. Okay, and this is my workflow. I'll quickly rename this. I don't want m underscore because it's a workflow. Okay, now let's quickly review the properties of this session whenever you're using the transaction control. The other basic question which comes up in your transaction control interview scenarios is, what is the commit type? Now usually you would have seen source or target or something else here. Let me open something else. Properties. Now if you see here, commit type, you have source, target, and user defined. So whenever you're using a transaction control transformation, it will always be considered as user defined because you are defining it at the mapping level to say that it has to do a commit or a rollback, isn't it? Right? So that's a user defined property which you have to do. And at the target level, based on your requirement, you can set your you can set your file properties like your appendixes, create target file. Let's put the output header file names and all of it. Okay, now these are the ones which we have used, and those are the properties which we have to know. Save it. Now I'll start the workflow. As the monitor is not open, it will come up now. That's running. That succeeded. You can see the run properties here. It got 20. Okay, let's go to the target file. Informatica. I have two folders, 910 and 951. Though I'm using version 951, my linking of the file directory structure is still to 910. Okay, so I'll go to the server, info shared, target files, and you can see these data here. See the date 23/8/27, 23/8/27, and I have 3 different files created with a header with the department number of 10 for this, 20 for this, and 30 for this. Now if I add department number 40, okay, let's do that. I should get 4 files created. So I'll go to the source files. This is my actual source file. Okay, let me remove these 3 of them here, add another 3 at the end, and I'll add them as some different number. And this is 10, 10, 30, so let me make it 40. This is the department number column, 40 and 40. Save it, restart. Now I should get another file with department number 40. I don't think it has read it because it's still showing me 20 records just like before. No, it has done it. See this department number 40, same time, all of them have been created again. So if I open it, these are the 3 where I've added 40 and I've got all 3 of them created. So in your source file, let's say only 10 is coming, you'll create only 1 file. If you're getting 50 and 60 and 80 and 100 as department numbers, how many ever are there, it'll create all of it. So with the simple logic of using the previous record check and the transaction control, we are able to pull in or create these files based on the properties of the transaction control transformation. Okay, so what are the questions again? What is transaction control? Active, why is it active? And what is the session property of commit type? That will always be user defined. And in the interview, like you've seen, these things might be a little confusing, so you'd have to review it a couple of times, especially the constant types and what it actually does. Maybe you can memorize the definition, and you can pull off any questions related to transaction control. And in the example, what are the different scenarios or questions which can come up, which is how do we dynamically create a file, how do we do the previous record check, and the ones which are related to transaction control. Okay, hope you've understood the transaction control better to what you have already known, or if it's the first time, I've tried to make it as clear as possible. You can drop in any questions if you have. Thank you and all the best.